Okay, guys, I think we're now live. It's another Thursday night with conversations with Commodores. And I have with me the pleasure, my guest is former ball player and former coach John Shoop with us this evening. And we've had a good little chat leading up. John, I really appreciate you making some time for us this evening.
Are you kidding me? Thank you for having me. Those 3 years I was a GA at Vanderbilt were three of the best years I had as a coach, as a person.
Absolutely. And I know leading up to this evening, this past week, some of the ball players who were there during those mid 90s years, you were there, have already chimed in, and I'm sure we'll be hearing from them for a little bit. But I'm gonna do a little bit of background to share with you guys with John. John comes from a football family. He's originally from Pennsylvania, made his way down to Sewanee, where he was a very talented quarterback, started a bunch of years. He was actually there. My middle brother, Robert, came on a year or two after John, so they were on the team together for a short while. But gosh, after a successful career at Sewanee, I want to say maybe Dartmouth, and then you became a GA at Vanderbilt during the DiNardo years.
That's right.
And then get this, guys, at age 25, he's coaching in the pros. He's coaching with the Carolina Panthers, where he was there in the pros for about a decade or so, and then back to college, UNC, then Purdue, and now happily retired in North Carolina. Have I from 30,000 feet up, bird's eye view, have I covered the career a little bit?
Yeah, you bet. About 12 years in the NFL and another, about 25, 26 years total. You bet.
Excellent. Guys, you guys may also know John's brother, Bob, who coached as the defensive coordinator for Coach Franklin, beginning, I think, in 2011 for the Commodores. And then he followed Franklin to Penn State, where I think now he is, I want to say, at Michigan.
That's right. He jumped around a little bit from Penn State to Tennessee to Mississippi State. Now he's up at Michigan with Jim. So
I know that's the life of being a college.
That's right.
Pro coach. I'm sure at times you pick up and you go where in the next position.
That's right.
But John, one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on tonight is you have a unique perspective, and we haven't heard from anybody yet. We've heard from players and cheerleaders, coaches, administrators, but we haven't heard from somebody connected with the program who was a graduate assistant during their only years they were on campus. So what brought you to Vanderbilt? I know you were at Dartmouth the year before, but what brought you to Vanderbilt, and how did you get connected with Coach DiNardo?
Yeah, well, it's a funny story. So I was at Sewanee, and as a senior at Sewanee, our head football coach was a man named Bill Samko, and he said, to get a graduate assistant's job, you just got to cast a wide net. At that time, there were 105 Division 1A schools, and I sent out 105 Division 1, I sent out 105 resumes and inquiries. I got 105 rejection letters. This is all in paper and stationery, and my roommate pasted them up on the wall. And so I went to Dartmouth to volunteer coach for 1 year. And what I figured out was there were a couple of schools that were having trouble getting graduate assistants because you had to get into school first. And so there were 3 schools that I thought, okay, I'll play that game. And I applied and got into graduate school. I got into graduate school at Duke, at Georgia Tech, and at Vanderbilt. And so I knew that Jerry got into the office really, really early. And June Jakes, everybody knows June was his assistant. And Jerry, every once in a while, I'd call at about 4:30. I'd read something that he got in super early in the morning. And I'd call early in the morning, and I got him to pick up the phone. And I started talking to him, and I told him I want to be a GA. And he said, well, you got to understand, you have to be able to get into school. And I said, I'm accepted. He said, You're what? He said, I'm already accepted. I've already applied. And so I considered Georgia Tech or Vanderbilt. And I came down and visited Vanderbilt. And well, while I was at Vanderbilt, I actually coached on defense. And there was a defensive coordinator named Carl Reese, the Bull. Everybody knows Bull Reese. And I fell in love with Bull Reese. And Bull Reese is like, it remains to this day, like in the coaching world, a real mentor of mine. And so for 3 years, I decided I wanted to be Bull Reese's right-hand man. I didn't think to myself, what's the best program? What's the best, I wasn't trying to go to Alabama or to I didn't want to go to a big whatever. I wanted to go to where I just fell in love with the coach. And old Bull Reese, anybody that ever played for him or worked for him, loves Bull Reese. And so that's kind of how I ended up there. While I did indeed work for Jerry, I really didn't have much connection with Jerry. Our staff was, I'm not saying divided, but, they ran the eye bone, kind of the wishbone on offense. And so we had to operate our own scout teams and do different things. We frankly did not interact that much. While I was at Vanderbilt, it's where I started dating my wife as well, who was getting her master's at the divinity school there. Even she would say, you were working for Bull Reese, Ron Case, and Billy Elias. Those are three of the, I've been all over. Those are three of the greatest coaches I've ever been around.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I should have started out with this. How does a guy from Pennsylvania make his way down to Sewanee in such a small town, a Division III school in the deep South, and want to go to school and play ball there?
Well, it's funny. My older brother, who you mentioned, is a football coach. He went to Yale to play football and baseball. Mm-hmm. And he was a wide receiver and a pitcher. And a man named Bill Samko recruited my brother to go to Yale. And Bill was an assistant coach at Yale. And Bill was recruiting me to go to Yale all through high school. And I was a quarterback. And they told me if I went to Yale, they were going to make me a defensive back. And the baseball coach said, I'm not sure you're good enough to make our baseball team. Well, my senior year, Samko got the head coaching job down at Sewanee. And he said, if you come to Sewanee, you'll probably start a quarterback for 3 years, and you'll be the starting shortstop on the baseball team for 4. And it was really important to me. I think I knew even then that I wanted to be a football coach or wanted to be in the sports world. And different people make different decisions, but it was really important to me to go somewhere where I played. I wanted to play. I didn't want to like walk on at Pitt or something and be part of a big program, but then never play. I wanted to know what it felt like to sit in the pocket, to get beat up a little bit. And I sure as heck wanted 4 at-bats, every day in a baseball game in the spring as well. So Sewanee was, Samko talked me into coming down to visit. I didn't actually even visit until really late in the spring. The deadlines were all gone, and he kind of squeezed me in there, and I really fell in love with it.
Now, did you bring or come down for your visit during the big spring party week, or was that a different week?
No, I did actually. I did, and boy, I saw fire and rain that weekend. I was like, Samko was telling me it's not always like this, And
when it is, it is.
I know it. There were some wild horse riders down there for sure. But that's really not what attracted me there. Really, I was a religion major, and so I was really interested in a liberal arts degree. I like the idea of small classes. I like the idea of a smaller school, and I wanted to play. I didn't want to go somewhere and have my position changed and maybe play my senior year or make a contribution. I want to play all 4 years.
Well, it's not to stereotype you coming out of Pennsylvania, but how long did it take you to get used to sweet tea and boiled peanuts?
A couple of trips to a truck stop, I'm not sure I'm still used to some of the things, but I do live in just outside Asheville, North Carolina, in the mountains on a horse farm. And son of a gun, if you'd have asked me 30 years ago, Shoop, do you think you'll live off the grid in the mountains of Western North Carolina? I'd have said, I think you're on drugs. We need to drug test you. And well, here I am.
Well, I was going to say that your journey, and we're going to head through that a little bit, is that's what's just always so fascinating to me, is how guys get from A to B to C to where they are today. But let's go back to those Vanderbilt days. You obviously you raised Donardo's eyebrow when you informed him you were already enrolled in the school. Did you then take, for example, a recruiting visit of any sort, or did it? Tell us about how it evolved to where either Coach Reece or Donardo really had that talk with you and said, here's what we need from a GA. Does this interest you?
Yeah, well, as I remember, I did come down for a spring practice one time. I didn't spend a great deal of time with Jerry, other than, here's the deal. We expect this or that, maybe a brief interview. But I really sat in with, Bull and Ron and Billy Elias. I really spent the couple of days with them. And another man named Charlie Coiner. There's going to be some Vanderbilt guys out there that remember that name. Charlie's still one of my closest friends in the world. And when I was the offensive coordinator of the Chicago Bears, I hired Charlie to be my right-hand man up there. And lo and behold, it was Charlie that kind of engineered my hiring down at Vanderbilt. And he remains to this day one of my closest friends in the world. But, Bull kind of painted a picture of, and anybody that's been around Bull, he's kind of an unorthodox guy. And I kind of thought that would benefit me, because Bull wasn't the most organized guy, and I was hyper organized. And so I thought, son of a gun, I could be really useful to this guy. And we actually did kind of mesh. And son of a gun, you'll remember guys like Shelton Quarles, Alan Young, Jamie Duncan, Carlton Hall. We got pretty good on defense. I love Woody Weidenhofer, but Woody won with all those players that, we had recruited there with those guys.
Yeah. John, several of those guys have been on this show in the past couple of months, and they raved about Coach Reece and Woody and all of those guys. But let me ask you, you were a quarterback in college. You coached, I think I heard you say QBs at Dartmouth for the 1 year. Obviously, a quarterback studies defense all the time, but it's different when now you're having to coach it. So talk about your learning curve under some very fine coaches, but you had a lot to learn. Anybody would be at that age trying to coach up guys who are just a couple of years younger than you.
You bet. I had, it was a real blessing, because I was a GA for 3 years. In my first year, I worked with Billy Elias, and another coach on the staff was Jaffe Oliver, and I worked with the defensive line. And we were a 3-4 defense and had a hop around nose guard, a guy named Gary Rogers, who was about as tough as a boot, kind of wiry, undersized. And Gary, it was my job to really coach the nose guards. That's what I was. And so I just absorbed so much about the front seven, specifically defensive line and technique. And then the next year, Billy Elias moved just to the linebackers, and Bull was also coaching linebackers. And so the next year, I coached linebackers, and we had some great linebackers. Shelton and Rico were there my first year while I was working with the defensive line, but Carlton and Jamie Duncan, Anthony Jordan, these guys started coming in then, and I learned a lot there. And then my last year, one of the best coaches I've ever been around, they moved me to the secondary. And I was really lucky, because I think Bull really took an interest in me as a coach and thought, this is going to be really beneficial for you to coach the D-line, coach the linebackers, and now coach the secondary. And, we had guys like Ron Davis. We recruited Eric Vance. Anthony Jordan was the safety who ended up moving down to a linebacker position. We got pretty good on defense as well. And, guys like, Kenny Simon, Gary Sheffield. There were some really good players. And Ron really taught me a lot about not just technique. Ron and Bull taught me how to coach players. you ain't had a defensive player on this thing right now that would give Ron Case any crap. Case was the toughest dude that I'd ever been around, and they really taught me how to coach players, and I was lucky to be around those guys.
Gosh, you're listing off just some super athletes from
Yeah.
back in. But we've got some athletes who've joined us that want to say hello to you, John. We got Joe Peebles, my head coach, Shoop.
Hey, Joe was our scout team quarterback. Me and Joe taught me more about quarterback in my first 3 years than anybody probably. Underrated guy, Joe. If you would have been somewhere else where we didn't run the wishbone, man, you'd be playing on Sundays.
Well, Joe, I think was a freshman my senior year, so he and I spent 1 year together. Jim Aguiano also says "hum babe" to you.
And how about that? Babe. That's right. If that scout team wasn't going rapid fire, that'd be the way that old Bull Reese would, as Bull Reese would say, he's about to get the red ass if that scout team doesn't going. So
right.
Let's get moving.
Ed Parrish is with us and Brian Josie is with us. And you mentioned Gary Rogers. Gary usually joins us, so he may pop in a little bit. That's great. But what at the time that you were the GA, you were dating your now wife. What part of campus were you? Where were you living? Were you on campus or off campus?
I think every year I lived somewhere else. Always off campus, and just these terrible places. I mean, that are probably shut down right now. But if you were working at Vanderbilt in the early 90s, you were probably working 20 hours a day. So it wasn't like I was going home a whole lot. But I was close enough, I remember, to ride my bike. So I rode my bike quite regularly.
Well, have you been back to the campus or to Nashville in the last, say, decade?
I really don't even recognize it. It's just amazing. And I'm so happy for the university and Candace Lee now leading the athletics. I mean, really, Vanderbilt has played a leadership role nationally, I think, in terms of sports administration. There's some teams that really make me shake my head, but Vanderbilt is kind of a leader.
Well, it's on a side note, you may or may not have seen in the last couple of weeks, they've come out with 2 initiatives that I'm really hoping that folks will get behind. One is a fans council, and they have opened it up for any and all fans to be involved and to have a voice. They've also created, and I put the recent interviews on our page here, is the Black and Gold Club. And it's available to any and all former ball players and athletes of the various programs. But the purpose behind it is, and Chris Griffin's going to come on, the former player who is heading it up, is to talk about internships, mentorships, and potentially maybe job opportunities, just creating that older generations connecting with the younger generations, which they've needed for decades. Kenny Cole has joined us and Brian Diggs. I want to thank you guys.
B. Diggs. Holy moly. This is great hearing these names.
Yeah, well, there's going to be some more piling in. I've got former Sewanee quarterback and former coach at Vanderbilt as a GA and a pro coach and college coach, John Shoop, with us. John, I got to ask you this. I know I won't be the first one to ever ask, but I always, because I knew of you, we'd never really met or maybe met once or twice back in the day. Did the Stoops boys and the Shoop boys ever collide? Were they ever on the same coaching staffs anywhere?
No, I don't think so. You know, those guys, the Stoops brothers are from Youngstown, Ohio, and me and my brother from Pittsburgh. So we're not far apart. And we are about the same generation, but I'm sure we've played against each other a couple of times and competed, but we never coached together. But Bob Stoops is a good man. I really like him.
Yeah, he was, of course, guys, he was at Oklahoma for more than 15 years and retired. And his brother, Mark, I think may still be coaching somewhere. I'm not for sure where. I don't know him as well. Let's get back to your days at Vanderbilt. That was I want to take us. I want you to take us to Bell Buckle.
Oh, let me tell you. Okay, Bell Buckle was my personal hell. I was a graduate assistant right there. Now, perhaps one of my favorite stories of all time was, and some of these guys are going to remember Bell Buckle, but in the first or second Saturday of training camp, we had a big scrimmage set. And son of a gun, it was raining cats and dogs. I mean, it was raining so hard. In those fields, we'd beaten them up so bad, and it was terrible. And Jerry was as mad as a hornet. And when Jerry got mad, he would just yell at like the person who had least of anything to do with it. And it was me and Charlie Coiner. He'd just start screaming at me and Charlie Coiner, like we're supposed to control the rain. And so after the meeting, Bull said, well, I know you guys can't control the rain, but you better do something and make sure that field is set. Well, son of a gun, Charlie Coiner called up to Asheville, and he got two news stations to fly their helicopters down low over our field to try to dry them out. And so right as the sun rose one of those Saturday mornings, I mean, as soon as it comes up, there comes down these two helicopters from Nashville, and they start trying to dry our fields. I never saw Charlie Coiner was as proud as a peacock. He went back into that meeting and said, hey, DiNardo, those fields are dry, buddy. And we ended up having a scrimmage there.
Oh,
Man,
wow.
Bell Buckle was rough. It was rough. I know it was rough for the players. It was rough for the coaches too now.
Now, did you guys also dorm in some of those really terrible bunks as well?
Yeah, it was a bit of a Spartan lifestyle. But as the graduate assistant, for some reason, Jerry thought it would be good if the coaches stayed up and played poker. And here I'm exhausted. I'd been up since, 4 or something in the morning. Yeah. And I had to be the banker in every poker game each night. So I had to stay up super late. And I mean, it was just like a Navy SEAL sleep deprivation test for graduate assistants,
Could you imagine the modern athlete being taken out there, the squad being taken out to a bell buckle?
I'll bet some of those players, some of those undershorts are still kind of moist and all wet. They haven't dried out yet, those socks and jocks from Bell Buckle. That place was rough.
I can't remember which of the guys I talked with a few months ago about their experience when showering in ankle deep water. Just anyway, just on and on and on how horrible it was. But the overall effect was bringing the team closer together, mentally making you tougher, and creating a solid unit because everybody is in that misery. Yeah. And I can only imagine as a coach and as a GA, you've got to have even more energy than probably the ball players do. It's expected for them to grouse about it and just slog through it. But you've got to be there encouraging and doing your thing.
Well, the interesting thing as a GA is I was 22, 23, and 24. And so some of these guys, I'm the same age as them. And so I was a lot closer to some of the players probably than I was, the coaches. I mean, I was certainly close to Bull, Ron Case, and Billy Elias. But, I mean, it's not like I didn't go out or something there, on the strip there and see some of them at night.
Well, some of those coaches are twice your age.
Yeah,
You're as a GA, you're just kind of straddling that fence between.
That's right.
The paid coaches on staff, and you're still a student yourself.
That's right. I was a student myself. You're exactly right. I was.
Well, let's talk about this for just a second, John. Is the NCAA's transfer portal. It's been around. It's probably been around for quite a while in different connotations, different names. And certainly it's not anything new for talented athletes to switch schools. One comes to mind during our era is Troy Aikman going from Oklahoma to UCLA. I mean, there's Russell Wilson more recently. There's hundreds of examples. And it's easy to criticize the modern athlete to say, well, he knew he wasn't going to play ahead of Trevor Lawrence. So Kelly Bryant just very quickly ran over to Missouri. It's too easy to say that, but what's your perspective on the transfer portal? And do you think it's a good thing for college sports?
Yeah, well, this is, in college, I've been an advocate for college athletes. And in fact, it's part of the reason I'm not coaching in college now. And I've really stood up for them and fought for some of their rights. And kind of a motto I've developed is DeMaurice Smith is the NFLPA lawyer for, the NFL Players Association. He once told me a slogan, and I like it. He says, we try to start it fair and go from there. Just start it fair and go from there. And, my last year at Vanderbilt, Jerry DiNardo left to go to LSU. I'm not mad at Jerry DiNardo, but that ain't fair for all the guys that we recruited to come to Vanderbilt. Okay? It's just not fair. And James Franklin did a great job at Vanderbilt. I respect James. I like James. I helped him hire some members of the staff, not just my brother. And but then James makes a decision to go to Penn State. That's the way it is. Well, if you start it fair and go from there, if coaches can do it, it's awfully hypocritical for a coach to then turn around and say, oh, this player isn't committed to the team. I'm calling BS on that. And so, like I said, start it fair, go from there. Guys like Joe Burrow, guys like Fields at Ohio State now, those guys have all transferred. Yeah. And players do it now. And the bottom line is, it always kind of gave me, it kind of, as Bull Reese would say, gave me the red ass when, not just coaches that I was working for, but even like assistant coaches who worked their tail off to recruit guys, and the day after the signing date, then leave Vanderbilt to take a job at Florida. When I was a coach at North Carolina and a coordinator, when I was a coach at Vanderbilt or at Purdue, I had opportunities every year to go somewhere else, including head coaching opportunities. And my wife, I'll never forget, she sat me down and she said, I just recruited a quarterback at North Carolina who was a great player, ended up doing a really nice job. And she said, what are you going to tell him? Mm-hmm. Can you go tell him that you're leaving right after the signing date? And I said, I can't do it. And so I stayed. And sadly, that's the year then that the NCAA stuff all started happening while I was at North Carolina. And really our lives changed forever in that. But if you started fair, I don't know how coaches with a straight face can look at a guy. And now, certainly if I'm a Vanderbilt fan and Vanderbilt star player transfers, I'm PO'd about it. But if Georgia's star player transfers to Vanderbilt, I'm excited about it. So everything's perspective.
You're so right. We've had the pandemic issues aside, and I know that's very hard to say, but we've had two safeties just this week who were contributors in the past put their names in for the transfer portal, and that hurts. But in the past, coaches would have to sign off if they would allow you to transfer to this conference or that program. But many coaches, and Franklin is included in this group, unless I'm mistaken, guys, y'all correct me. I don't know if Franklin ever had a, hey, I'm leaving speech to the team. He just left. And I think that's probably, and I'm not just singling him out. I know Tuberville did it and he left Auburn, but I think it's too easy for them to shy away from confronting the players that they've recruited and expected to be there. Anyway.
And I think another element in this that I think people need to realize is important is, as a coaching staff now, it's no longer the early 90s. You cannot be just a total jerk, as some of the coaches at Vanderbilt were, everywhere were. It was just a different day and age. And so in my mind, it's the coaches that can adapt. I think my feeling has always been players can be cared for into caring. People can be loved into loving something. And if you treat players and coaches with dignity and respect, it doesn't mean you get after them, or you can't get after them. It doesn't mean you can't hold them to a high standard, but you can't just mother F players like you used to, or punish them by making them run like you used to. It just ain't 1990 anymore. And coaches need to make sure they're adapting their program, and players want to go there and stay there.
Yeah, those coaches who aren't doing that, those programs are suffering.
They are.
But John, we got some more folks who stopped in. I want to make sure you know who were there. Jim Arnold is with us. Hey, Jim, thanks for stopping. Let's see. Russ Nicoli is with us. And Kenny Cole has a good point here for me to bring up. He says, players are the ones who the fans come to see. So players make billions of dollars for the NCAA and the schools. Should we therefore pay the players? Should players organize and go on strike? And I know there's been a lot of talk about that out on the West Coast, maybe the Stanford players and other Pac-12 players. I don't know how far they've gotten, but gosh, we could talk about this for hours and not have a full consensus. But I think that slowly the players, the student athletes, are gaining more, I don't know if the word's power, but more rights. They're getting more of a seat at the table as things move along. And I'm glad for that.
I am as well. And I've been a proponent, a supporter. I've been to Washington, D.C. to talk about these things with senators and Congress people. I was in Student Athlete, the first movie that LeBron James and his film crew ever produced. I've, been all over the country really trying to talk about what is fair. And I don't know that I necessarily think of it in terms of should we pay the players. I do think this, though. Players should be able to make money from their name, image, and likeness. I have no problem if the star quarterback from Vanderbilt has a car deal at the same place the offensive coordinator has a car deal. What's the problem with that? What's the problem with your star defensive tackle making an ad for the local hamburger shop there on campus and getting a free meal? People, with regards to payment of athletes, there's an assumption that athletes aren't getting paid right now. I can promise you there's a lot of programs right now that are giving athletes what they need in pretty discreet ways. And so it's almost like Al Capone. Al Capone doesn't want a liquor to be made legal. College coaches that are kind of doing things underhand right now, they don't want payment to players in any way, shape, or form to be made legal, because they're the people right now that have the chutzpah, or I should say have the unscrupulous nature that they're willing to do some of these unsavory things to not necessarily even pay the player, but pay their parents and pay friends of the family. And It's happening in the conference you're in now.
Oh, sure. Well, how much would the 1989 John Shoop be worth in today's pay to the athletes?
You'd be in debt. The school would be in debt. You'd be in the red. I'd have to pay.
Well, let's stay in that time period for just a minute or two, 88, 89. What was so fun about playing for Sewanee and in that conference and being QB1, as it's called now?
Well, just being able to play football. I mean, that was the thing that I wanted to do. Your teammates are the same. I got as excited for a game at Sewanee in front of 100 people as I got in a NFL championship game at Soldier Field. I had the same butterflies. I had the same excitement. It's not the stadium. It's not the Monday night crowd. It's the competition and being in it with your friends. And if I was good enough, I would have kept doing football as a player. But as it turns out, in the NFL, there's not many 5'8" quarterbacks that can't throw the ball more than 30 yards. And so when I realized, that's probably my limit, I made the decision that coaching might be for me.
Well, you clearly made a great decision, because after Vanderbilt, tell the folks what was next on your coaching tree.
Yeah, well, so from Vanderbilt, I left and I went to the Carolina Panthers. And the Carolina Panthers were a brand new team at this time. In 1995 was their first year as an expansion team. And I went as what's called a quality control coach. And I was one of the first quality control coaches in the NFL. It's basically a graduate assistant in the NFL. But I worked my tail off that first year. We drafted a quarterback named Kerry Collins my first year. And by the end of my second year, as a 26-year-old now in my second season, I'm coaching our quarterback, Kerry Collins. I'm his position coach. We went to the NFC Championship game, and Kerry ended up going to the Pro Bowl. So from there, you know, I was kind of lucky that my career took off. And by 30, I was the offensive coordinator for the Chicago Bears. And so, you know, it was pretty fast, but Bull actually helped me get that job as well. It's funny because when Jerry left to go to LSU, the players might remember a guy named Rod Dowhauer came in. And when Rod came in, he hired a lot of pro guys. And Ken Wisenhunt was on that staff, in fact. But one of the pro guys that he hired was George Katavolis. And George Katavolis was only a Commodore for about 10 days. George came in and I was assigned, I was trying to kiss everybody's butt, seeing if I could still get a job, hang on. And George, I was assigned to George to kind of take him around, make sure that he saw everything. He was going to be the defensive coordinator. And so George and I were kind of attached at the hip for a week. And then George said to me, I hate to say this to you, John, but I'm leaving. I just took a job as the secondary coach for the Carolina Panthers. I said, George, he said, can you ride me to the airport and return my company car for me? I said, yeah, I'll ride you to the airport. And as he left, I handed him one of my resumes. I said, I don't care what it is. I said, I'll fill the coffee cups. I'll fill the gas tanks if you can get me in that building. And lo and behold, the head coach of the Panthers at that time was a guy named Dom Capers. The GM was a guy named Bill Polian. And all of these guys, Vic Fangio was our defensive coordinator. All these guys had USFL ties, and Bull Reese used to coach in the USFL. And so Bull called me one day and he goes, hey, listen, there's going to be a man named Dom Capers who's going to call you probably real soon. Whatever he says, you just tell him, yes, 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 I can do it. As soon as I hung up the phone, it rang again. And Dom's asking me about computers. Do I know this? You know, computers were still kind of new. Have I ever used this video? I'd never even heard of anything he was talking about. But I said, yes, 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 I got it. And he said, when can you start? And I was at the office of the Carolina Panthers the next morning in my pickup truck.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. And I want to set the stage for you guys who may not appreciate this. You're how old when you started with the Panthers?
I was 25 when I started with the Panthers.
And how old was Kerry Collins the year you were coaching him and he goes to the Pro Bowl?
He was probably 24, but we had a quarterback on our team, Steve Berline, who was
oh my gosh, he was
probably 7 years older than I was.
I was going to say Berline was an older, much older player.
Yeah, and he's great. He's still a wonderful friend of mine. But I remember Steve and I sat down. Actually, Steve sat me down. And he said, here's how it is. He said, I don't care if you're 100 years old, and I don't care if you're 24. If you help me get better, I'll listen to you. If you can't help me get better, I'm going to tune you out. And we had a great relationship. He actually, Kerry ran into some alcohol problems, is doing fine now, but he had some personal issues. And Steve actually had some great, great years with the Carolina Panthers, which really kind of personally kind of helped build my resume as well.
The thing that I always remember about Berline is he took one of the most vicious, legitimate hits I've ever seen in college football. I know you remember this. This is the Notre Dame-Alabama game. Cornelius Bennett hit him so hard, it knocked him 3 states over. It was such a monumental hit that it was made into artwork that now hangs in the University of Alabama's sports museum on campus. But I was there that day and oh my gosh, wow. He turned the corner like a bootleg type play and Cornelius just was right there. But
He's
his
a tough
credit,
son of a gun, old Steve is.
I was going to say, to his credit, he bounced up and, he made it.
It's
He had a very
it's
fine.
funny. I can remember early in the NFL, Cornelius Bennett, you say that name. I can remember we had to play the Buffalo Bills, and Cornelius Bennett and Bruce Smith always used to line up right next to one another. And I can remember Kerry Collins asking me, how in the heck are we going to block these two guys? I said, well, we might not, throw the ball pretty quick. That's kind of the game plan. Get it out of your hands.
Oh, I'm sure there were a lot of 1 and 3 step drops that game. But I'm sorry we're bouncing around, but there's so much great stuff to talk about, John. And for you guys who are just tuning in, talking with John Shoop. John was a GA at Vanderbilt under Coach DiNardo, 92, 3, and 4, I believe, or during that, that time period. And then after that, made his way into the pros for more than 10 years. And during your years in the pros, you're coaching guys who are younger than you. You're coaching guys who are considerably older than you. How did you establish yourself as a coach and separate yourself, even though you're a decade younger than some of these established vets, to get them to listen to you?
Yeah. Well, even at Vanderbilt, I was struggling to get some guys to listen to me sometimes. But this is what I believe with coaches, and different coaches have different styles. But there's one thing I always look for when trying to hire a staff. And what it was an authoritative demeanor. Mm-hmm. Now, I can't always define what an authoritative demeanor is, but I know it when I see it. And it's a guy that knows what he's talking about. It's a guy that's not afraid to admit that he made a mistake. It's a guy that's willing to study and try to learn. And it's a guy that speaks to players confidently, not abusively, not anything like that. And so I had a great mentor in the NFL, and a man named Dick Geron, who was the NFL Coach of the Year my first year as a coordinator with the Bears. We went 13-3. He was the Coach of the Year, but he was really a great mentor to me. And kind of like Ron Case taught me in my early 20s, Dick kind of taught me in my 30s, this is kind of how you handle yourself with the media. This is kind of how you handle yourself with big time players. I think there's some coaches that are afraid to coach superstar players. Some of the best relationships I've ever had with players have been, Randy Moss, a superstar player, the first round draft pick of Kerry Collins, a superstar player. I mean, those have been some of the best relationships that I've had. And I think it has to do with, it's not faking it till you make it. It's actually just being honest, but having an authoritative demeanor, knowing what you're talking about, doing your work.
For athletes, it's not just the athleticism you're born with. It's the hard work. It's the willingness to be coached. And I don't think that any athlete trusts his or her coach until there's some type of a relationship there. I don't mean a friendship. I mean, that could be it. There has to be that trust going both ways. I'm going to throw you to the deep ball because I know you're going to be where you need to be and fight for that ball or whatever it is. I'm not going to let you play this version of nose tackle because I don't think that you're disciplined enough to do what you need to do because everybody else is relying upon you. And I've never been a coach, but just following the sport as long as I have and being such a fan, there has to be that relationship between player and coach, that trust element. And did you see that developing in your years as a GA when you were at Vanderbilt? Because you had some mighty fine players you were coaching up.
It's interesting. Two things that I think of when you're talking there. I realized at Vanderbilt, and maybe at Dartmouth as well, our quarterback was a guy named Jay Fiedler who played 12 years in the NFL. I realized players are really smart. They know if a coach is BSing them. I think there were some coaches that weren't great on those staffs in 92, 3, and 4. I don't need to talk about them, but I'm sure some of these players can think of who those guys were. Players are smart. They know if a coach knows what he's talking about or not, or has done his work or not. And it's been my experience that I've never been on a good football team. I've never been on a good football team where our best players were also not our hardest workers. I've never been on it. I mean, when I was at the Carolina Panthers, and we got really good really fast, it was because of guys like Kevin Green and Sam Mills who set really the tempo on how to work. When I was at Chicago, it was guys like Olin Kreutz and Big Cat Williams who really kind of showed everybody this is how we work. Brian Urlacher might have been the most talented guy on the team, but Olin Kreutz set the tempo, you know, and he too was an all-pro player. And when your best players are your hardest workers, man, you got a chance to be a good team. If your most talented player is not a real hard worker, morale is going to suffer on a team. And the most underrated quality in a football team is morale. And morale doesn't come about naturally. Morale is fostered. Morale is coached. Morale is, it's a recipe that I think smart coaches really pay attention to.
Was there a big difference in the college players in trying to keep up morale versus the professionals that you coached for so long? There has to be. I mean, those guys are older. There's a lot of money at stake.
Well, it's interesting because when I was at Vanderbilt, I was working hard to try to keep players' morale up because really my job was to coach the offensive scout team for our defense. And guys like Joe Peabody. And Joe was a wonderful quarterback, was an amazing passer. Joe could, I mean, we're talking about transfers. Had Joe made a decision to transfer, he'd have been somewhere else. It's just we were running the I-bone. Ronnie Gordon or Kenny Simon or Cedric Douglas, one of those guys was going to be our quarterback. And I always thought to myself, a big part of my job is to help keep his morale up, help keep, you know, some of these guys that were on the scout team of offensive line, you know, help them see the light that, hey, you're just a freshman right now. By the time you're a senior, man, you ain't going to be with me anymore. Don't worry. And so that was something that I really practiced every day. And some days I fell short, I'm sure.
Well, it would be too easy. I don't have the experience. I'm just speculating. But in that scenario, when you have professionals and you're trying to keep up morale, do they come at you as their coordinator or as their position coach? Man, I know what to do. You don't have to pump me up. You don't have to do this, do that. Well, I'll do, you know, I'm a pro.
No, it's interesting. People have said this to me before. Oh, hey, those guys are so talented. You must roll the ball out and just let them play. No. In fact, you know, if you watch an NBA game, there's more coaching going on in one trip down the court than in an entire college basketball game. In the NFL, the best players are the hardest workers, and the best players also want to be coached hard. Hard. That does not mean they want to be yelled at. It does not mean they want to be called out in the media. But Steve Berline would have lost respect for me if I wasn't pointing out that, hey, he was false stepping, and that's why that ball's late. And Ashley Ambrose is going to pick it off if you ain't careful now.
Look what happened this past week, what Bruce Arians had to say about Tom Brady's performance. He didn't pull any punches, and that's arguably the greatest quarterback that ever played the game. Brady had a very subpar game, and Arians called him out on it.
Well, players know if you're being disingenuous. As I said, I learned at Vanderbilt. Players are pretty smart. And some of the players there saw through the BS of some of the coaches.
Well, John, we're getting close toward the end of our discussion, and I sure appreciate your.
I could talk for hours here about Vanderbilt.
Oh, well, gosh, I want to get to that point now. Now, granted, the statute of limitations is long past for what I'm going to ask you to share with what you want to share, but we've got so many guys, Gerald Collins. And
Gerald, holy moly. What a great linebacker he was. Holy moly.
Well, I know they loved you back in the day, but I want you to pull out some names and share some good memories or some good thoughts you've got on any of these guys who you may have been.
Hey, everybody right now, okay, if your wife is in listening distance, you might want to be careful because some of these players might remember that me and Bill Matola were responsible for chaperoning the recruiting parties at the top of the stadium club. And some of you right now, as I told Bernard earlier, some of you will never run for political office unless I okay it. Now, what Jerry had me and Bill Matola chaperoning those recruiting parties for is beyond me. But it was pitch black on top of those recruiting parties. And what we would do all week, Rick George, now the AD at Colorado, was our associate AD. And we made flyers, and we had to take flyers all over TSU's campus and Fisk's campus and invite all of them to our recruiting parties that we would have on Saturday night of recruiting weekends. Some of the people on this right here now were probably at some of those parties. The DeGraff and Reed twins, some of the things they were doing at those, it was nuts. It was nuts. It was eye-opening for me.
Hey, John, where were those parties held?
At the top of the stadium club.
Like over my shoulder?
Yes, exactly right. Looking out over the field. And
Joe says, Joe says, watch what you say now.
Well, some of those parties were some of my fondest memories. Mm-hmm. My wife and my now wife, Marcia, and Billy Matola's wife as well. The four of us would be chaperoning the parties, and we were having as much fun as everybody that was there. And then the next day, Jerry would be asking us, well, how was the party? I said, I think everybody had a pretty doggone good time. I think they did. Guys like Carlton Hall chose Vanderbilt over Southern Cal and Colorado. Jamie Duncan could have gone anywhere in the country. He chose here. I think we're doing okay at the stadium parties.
Oh, that's awesome. Oh, John, that's just so great. That's great. Well, I sure appreciate you spending some time with us tonight.
Thank you.
Sharing your perspective, a longtime coach, and not many people may have known or knew that you spent those 3 years of really learning your craft with Coaches Case and Reece and others.
Great men. It was one of a privilege of a lifetime to be at Vanderbilt, and I'm so glad that I have a master's in education from there as well. I'm so proud of my time there, and boy, I sure root for Vanderbilt deeply.
Oh, that's so great to hear. And clearly you made positive impression with all the love you're getting tonight and from guys in the past. But guys, as we try to do each Thursday night, it's conversations with Commodores from all different eras and decades. And I appreciate everybody's sharing some love with us and support and watching this. And I don't want to get out of here. I should have mentioned this at the very beginning. We got a lot of Commodores who live along the Gulf Coast, the Florida and Alabama Panhandle. And for any of you guys who have been affected by that, you're in our thoughts. And if we can do anything, please reach out. It's just, that's one of the reasons why we're here. We just want to make sure that you guys know that we're here for you in any way that we possibly can. So I hope you're safe for those of you who've been impacted by Hurricane Sally. But guys, thank you again. We're going to come back again next week and anchor down.